Good morning. Can you hear me? Give me a little nod. I'd like to bring my fellow presenters on, and I will introduce them in a moment. There's loads of really fantastic technology that we will see at these next 48 hours, and it's all wonderful stuff about social commerce, AR, VR, but how can you deal with this if you've already got an existing website or existing shop experience? Imagine many of you have already got that. Certainly most of my clients have got that, and it's not possible for them to bulldoze the lot, which might be a very tempting idea, to buy into some huge platform that someone says, oh, well, you can do everything from the beginning to the end, you can do all your logistics. That's not really what the idea at this conference is about. As the keynote speaker said, it's about collaboration. How can we bring all these things together? And in this journey, you're very unlikely to be able to have the luxury of just destroying everything. You want to work out how to use some of the old stuff. Maybe you don't show it to your customers, but make the front end interface really great and a really great experience. Sometimes you'll need to change things to be able to alter the journey, which you don't want to be inhibited by your back end system. And that's what we're here to talk about. What is legacy? How can we get around it? How can we work with it? And how we can make best use of all of that stuff in this new age of retail? So I'd like to introduce my panel. First, we have Steve Roberts, Head of IT Operations at Boohoo. Could you say a few words about yourself, Steve?
About what, sir? About the website?
About you and your Boohoo.
Yeah, so we basically look after all of the IT for the business. Obviously, we've got various websites, mobile apps, ERP, and all your sort of traditional back office systems, and we're just obviously on a very high growth business, and we have to be able to sort of facilitate that growth in IT as best as possible.
And if someone didn't know what Boohoo.com sold, could you tell me?
It sells amazing clothes.
Amazing clothes.
Yes, very, very good price as well.
Thank you. So then we've got Dan Hartveld, CTO of Red Ant.
Hi there. So Red Ant are a technology partner. We predominantly deal with retailers doing in-store technology. I myself have worked with a wide variety of retailers, predominantly in the fashion industry, helping them basically digitize their in-store experience as well as consumer apps and any other sort of mobile tech.
And Rebecca Salisbury, who is Deputy Director, BBC Platform and Head of Audience Platform. Rebecca.
Indeed. Hopefully I don't have to explain BBC. We have awesome content. And my role in Audience Platform as part of the digital proposition is the customer data, audience data, and personalization services that we're bringing online now.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open with our first question. So, what is legacy and what's wrong with it? Who'd like to start?
Well, I think it's fairly subjective. People often mean it's stuff that's old, but often I think in today's IT industry, with stuff changing so fast, even something that's a year old could be legacy because the pace of change. And I think people also associate legacy with bad, but at the end of the day, if you've got something that's old and works for you, then I don't see why you have to sort of change it or fix it.
What sort of legacies do you think you already carry in your business?
Well, I think probably not that many because we're a sort of relatively new business in terms of we've been going for sort of 12 years, so we've got no real sort of old mainframe like the sort of bank systems in the 60s. So we're quite a reasonably new tech business, I suppose. But some of that is being deliberate in the fact that we've deliberately gone out and not sort of bought ourselves into a sort of SAP type situation whereby once you've got it, you're kind of stuck with it for 20 years. So we've tried to sort of avoid that and really take a bit of a sort of modular approach to systems building.
Mm-hmm. Dan, what's your definition of
yeah,
legacy?
I think I echo that. Legacy doesn't necessarily mean old. Most people confuse the two. Often, legacy systems are old systems. For me, I think they come in two different strands, really. There are the systems that are completely closed, that tend to be very old systems, that no one can get data in or out of, no one can talk to, communicate with, and therefore can't really change or adapt. And I think the other part of legacy is systems that were probably custom built by well-meaning development teams probably several years ago, and those teams have either moved on, the skills have been lost, the technology's moved on, and so actually it's very difficult to support and change. So they might have been great systems that work really, really well for you, but they're still very difficult to change. So fundamentally for me, a legacy system is one where it's either difficult to interface with and communicate with, or difficult to change when you need to.
Rebecca, I imagine there might be some legacy in BBC.
Just a little bit. We started publishing BBC News in 1997, and we're still running the same content management system in all of our journalism bureaus across the world. So the tech has moved on, of course, but there's quite a lot of the original concepts in there. And we've been trying to unpack it as an original monolith built by well-meaning developers who did exactly the right thing at that time. And over 20 years, it's moved on considerably, but it's still difficult to change. It takes time to change, and people, even our most clever software teams, are afraid of changing it too much because we rely on it so much. So again, legacy gets a bad rap. We kind of did a rebadging of that system in our group and started calling it CPS Classic. So, you know, it has value. It's really important to us. Legacy has more negative a connotation than we like to ascribe to it.
How do you find that plays out with newer members of your teams or staff who come in and go, "Ooh, what's that?"
Yeah, well, they see right through the classic badge anyway. It is what's that, but again, we're focusing on what's the value that it adds to the business, and look at the experience of the users. The journalists love it. It does exactly what they need it to do. They can rely on it, and it publishes the news in 42 languages every day. So helping even our new staff to understand what is the value in that system is more important than helping them overcome the fact that it was built 20 years ago by some guys that no longer exist.
So, Steve, given that some of our colleagues here are going to have to work with legacy, what would you say that we need to do to avoid the mistakes or take advantage of the old stuff? You know, what does good look like?
Well, I think from my point of view, good looks like, you know, I think like years ago, like legacy was the way, because, you know, there wasn't really much going out in terms of, like, you know, software as a service, platform as a service. Nowadays in the market, you can kind of buy what you want and put it together. And I think, you know, obviously, like 10, 20 years ago, that was probably slightly different. So I think people often get scared of the change because often, like, those systems have been in place for such a long time that to kind of replace them or change them is obviously painful and a lot of risk to it. But I think these days there's enough going on in the tech world to be able to, you know, if you've got a legacy system, don't try and replace it all in one. You know, often if that system does 10 things, you can start with the first thing and take that out, and sort of, I think slowly over time, sort of try and adopt a bit more of a kind of modular approach to what you do.
But if that original system did 10 things and wasn't designed to do 9 or 8, how do you partition it and get it to work with just 8 and then make 2 over there on a new system? How do you do that?
That's a good question. Well, I think that's probably a slightly different situation, because if you've got the 8 things it doesn't do anyway, then therefore...
No, you said there were 10 things,
10 things.
And then let you say you're going to do it bit by bit, you know, take off that corner, move it off to a new system.
Yep.
Presumably the rest of the system was expecting that 10th bit to be there.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, obviously.
Yeah.
In terms of breaking stuff apart, you've got to make sure that it doesn't break the other stuff. So I think that comes from having some good people in your team that understand your platform and understand, you know, does it do the inventory, stock, pricing, how those systems all sort of fit together. And I think maybe as a sort of pre-starter for that sort of project, you'd have to look at some really good systems documentation architecture to actually understand all the sort of data flows and what it does, to be able to sort of take it out and make sure that it still does what it does subsequently.
So Rebecca, in your experience, when you've taken a legacy system and started to move towards new, how have you approached it? Have you taken a bit off the side and replaced a bit of it, or replaced it all, or what's your tactics?
I've been thinking about this. I actually think we go right into the middle. Take the bit in the middle, which is usually where the business logic is, and figure out how we can make that more flexible and retained. That's where the real value is in that legacy system. Quite often, our systems aren't originally built with nice separation between business functions. The system architecture doesn't parallel the business architecture. So we're having to find that bit in the middle that is represents the real value, abstract that away from whatever we're trying to move away from, the older tech or a functional challenge, and build out from there.
So that's interesting. You said that existing systems perhaps had core business value or function, but wasn't very separable, wasn't very clear how that. So you'll be about defining clear boundaries around that, so that then you can plug and play. Okay, Dan, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd echo that as well. And just in terms of, often you'll find that is the case just because the business model has changed over that period of time. So obviously the business processes have changed and the architecture may not have done. I think in terms of what good looks like, I might be slightly controversial in saying I don't think it is, having big data lakes and all of this sort of, we must have microservices, we must do all of these sorts of things. I think probably the key to what good looks like for concentrating on not ending up with legacy systems is not locked in. And I think that's the key thing, is avoiding lock-in, whether that's vendor lock-in, whether that's technology lock-in. It doesn't really matter too much at that specific time. You'll generally make the best choices you will for what you know about at the moment, but you don't know what's going to happen in 5 years' time. So actually having a system set up, having business components and technology components that allow you to chop and change them, and almost not being worried, okay, we might have spent $500,000 on that system 2 years ago, but now it's not fit for purpose anymore. Well, let's change that without having to do massive business transformation, I think is the key to avoiding legacy.
Okay, so in your world, you provide products for people and you're presumably coming in and wanting to integrate. What challenges do you have when you walk in and they go, well, it's all in one solid box, I can't get to it?
Well, we actually had a bit of an epiphany probably about 18 months, 2 years ago, where we've been working with retailers for maybe a decade now, and one of the things that we felt was a really important business value for us was to be really great at integration. Because everybody had all these legacy systems, and all of our systems. So we make basically functionality and data for shop floor staff. So that touches everything. It touches stock control, product management, ERP, clienteling, all of these different systems. And so we just touted ourselves as we're great at integration. We can integrate with all of these different systems. This is really great. And actually what we found is we'd get in there, and it didn't matter how good we were at it, it would be killed at the sort of project management, business analyst level, because it just got wrapped into 6, 7 different teams, all responsible for all of these. Even if we could integrate with them really fine, just the project management of all of that is difficult. So we've actually slightly pivoted how we offer our solutions and our products to retailers, which is, actually we're not going to do any integrations with you. What we'll do is effectively, until you're ready for it, strings and sticky tape, we'll do file transfer, we'll basically just send you data in ad hoc forms, just so that you can try something out, so that you can get it into 10 stores, so that you can just replace this tiny part of the system. So I think the key is to not worry too much about integrating with 6 or 7 different systems at once. Actually, just figure out how you're going to sort of force it into your legacy system in some way or other, whether that's not real time, it's not particularly how you like it. And it gives you something you can try, you can innovate, and then actually prove a business value that means you can do an integration with this point that maybe costs you $1 million, but at least actually you've proven that it's worth that before going straight into core business transformation.
So most IT people, when they approach a project like that, they go, well, this is the main use case, but there's all these special edge cases. You've got to remember on a Friday, Bob does this special button that, reconciles the warehouse or something. How do you deal with all those edge cases?
Well, half of my job in those sorts of meetings is basically saying, don't worry about that edge case, it's not really important.
Okay.
And that's predominantly the thing. I think the big difference between what you see as disruptive tech innovators and businesses that have trouble keeping up with that tech is that fear that it must be perfect. It must be right when it goes live. And actually it doesn't need to be. Cover your 90% of use cases. Make sure that the other 10% don't have a completely terrible experience. But actually, if it means that you have to go back to that old system for that 10%, go back to that old system for that 10%. Like, just build in an approach that is pragmatic and don't try and do everything all at once.
So if you're buying a brand new system, do you think you should try and stick with out of the box, or should you do a bit of bespoke? Rebecca?
Well, it's the same answer. What Dan's talking about is what's really important. What is the business value that you want to get out of it? What are you trying to achieve? And that helps you throw out all those edge cases, all of the stuff that your stakeholder or your developer is running at you going, yeah, but, what about this? And so the same is true when you're buying something. You need to be focused on what's the value you want to get out of it. And there may be additional use cases you want to pursue down the line. But another banned phrase around my bit is future-proofed. I mean, I can see like burbles of recognition there. We all want to stop using future-proof because we're here talking about digital transformation and we're talking about, headed into a future that we can't map. So we need to be able to respond to what happens in the future. And buying a system isn't any different, but we got to focus on what is going to give us the most value.
So it's impossible to
right now.
future-proof because you don't know what the future
Yeah,
is.
it's a rubbish
in
phrase, right?
any short time. Okay, so you've given me one factor, which is some kind of value assessment when you look at a project and a function, and say, do that one because it's valuable. Are there any other factors that help you choose which ones you do?
Scale, non-functional requirements. I mean,
so we've got cost, scale, I suppose risk.
Yeah, it depends on what's important to us, right? And what's our appetite to risk, and how our non-functional requirements, which includes risk, I would say, factor into what we're trying to achieve, and what's our business culture about.
Yeah, and I think a key one is assessing lock-in, and it's not just about contractual lock-in. It is, how easy is it to get the data in and out of that system? How easy is it to transfer that functionality to a different business channel? Those are the, if you were going to say something as future-proof, for me personally, I would be like, well, it's easy to remove. That's the main, but it's easy to extract, and it's easy to interface with.
Okay. Have you got any examples of where you got stuck with a piece of technology, Steve? And even though you're only 5 years old, you must have got accrued some legacy already.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a little bit of stuff. Obviously, we've been going for just over 12 years now, so we have got some stuff. But I think we've made a conscious choice. Like when we look at, to answer the previous question, we've kind of made a conscious choice. For looking for new bits of software or bits and pieces, we do make a choice about whether or not it's easier to go and buy it. Easier being maybe it's quicker, or it's cheaper, and it's less risk. I think that's probably generally true for the bigger type systems, but for the sort of the smaller stuff, a lot of it's written in-house because we can write it in-house quicker, and obviously we've spent a lot of time and money on integration, so we're quite good at getting data in and out of various systems in a good way. So
you were telling me earlier that you've decided you're going to write your own pricing algorithm. I'm interested to know why that is, because surely if you've got an e-commerce platform, it must come with a pricing algorithm.
Yeah, it's got some, but I think, again, that choice was about, can we get something built in-house reasonably quickly with reasonably little cost and low risk that offered better functionality in the platform. So actually we've got our own system that basically reprices per territory and applies different rules for different types of products and so on and so forth. Because that for us was a relatively quick way. It was cheap to build, and we've seen some good benefits in terms of the ability to do that on the website.
Okay. Dan, going back to what you said about integration, so you're coming down on the side, don't try and integrate with everything, just
no, I think integration is a definite goal, and you have to have it in mind, and that's sort of going back to being able to have data, systems that you can get data in and out of easily, and that allows you to integrate easily. But I think the key to innovation is not necessarily being too concerned with that from the get-go. What you have to do is pick the right technology choices, make sure that when you do want to integrate, your new technology is not going to feel like a legacy already. But actually, I think trying to have every system talk to every other system it actually stops that innovation, because you have this tangled mess where you have these business critical systems that, like we were saying before, is fear of change. And you don't want to have 6 different teams fearing that change. If you've got one team fearing that change, that's okay. You can deal with that. That's a core business goal that you can drive them forward with. But everybody else will have different agendas. They'll have different business goals, and you want to try and avoid that sort of mess of having to do a huge program of work for a small innovation project.
Have you used any API gateways, those kind of things, or service buses, those kind of tech to provide integration?
Yeah, and I think they are pretty vital for any company with legacy technology. I mean, our systems, we actually have a sort of a light version of that for companies that don't already have BI systems and API integration systems. But I think most retailers that we work with and most people with legacy technologies have realized actually that's a core part. And it's really only been the past sort of 5 or 6 years we've seen that happen. And the main reason is it's extremely difficult to talk to your business about an API integration gateway, because what does that mean? What is the business value of that? And generally the way that it's done is it's tacked onto another project. We can't do project X until we've got some sort of API integration or some sort of service bus. But yeah, those things are, if you have legacy systems, are pretty vital.
Okay, so business people don't know what an API gateway is. I imagine there might be some here. Tell us what one is then. They sound exciting, and the elixir, the fix for everything.
Yeah, I mean, they come in slightly different forms. Essentially, it is a mediator between all of your different systems to process data moving in and out. And they are specifically designed to be extremely flexible with a lot of different ways that legacy systems talk to one another, and also a lot of modern ways that legacy talks to one another. And most of the time, they tend to also come with things like security and scalability and the ability to put some of your data out to the public internet without being too worried it's going to get stolen or hacked is generally what they're for.
Okay, I'm going to have another question for the panel, and then I'm going to look at the app for any questions from you. So get tapping into the app for a question. So we seem to have come down to having things broken into little bits. So don't take your whole system and don't try and convert it all in one go. Break it into parts, some sort of value assessment and risk assessment and cost assessment. With all that in mind, if now your business leader says, right, we're going to do something new on the website, it should be just easy. Let's say you're an e-commerce site and you've got an integration with all the credit cards and PayPal and Google Checkout, those kind of things, and then someone says, I want you to introduce Bitcoin. Now, what strikes me as complicated with Bitcoin, it's not just another payment gateway or something like that. It's so volatile, the price has changed since the beginning of our speaking on this podium. So as a customer, I want to know, right, where I'm choosing a shirt, what it would be the cost in Bitcoin at that time. So that's a different kind of integration, cross-cutting. That might make it very difficult to keep in our little modules, there's checkout, there's payment, there's browsing. How would you approach that kind of project? Do you want to have a go at that one?
Well, I think it's different, as you say, it's because in terms of it changes all the time. So I think there's obviously some risk around that therefore you've got your prices on the website got to change to kind of reflect what it's actually worth. So, I mean, aside from that, I think it's probably the same. Obviously, you've got the kind of back office piece around the accountancy bit, but I guess it's around the sort of the front end presentation. How do you make sure that at that moment in time that they press checkout, that both the customer and yourself get the best price? I'm not sure how we've actually looking to my colleagues for some.
Dan, well, how would you tackle that one?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of brings back to a lot of the stuff that we do in terms of, like I said, the technology that we provide often it hits lots of different businesses, lots of different business areas even. I would say take something like Bitcoin. I would again focus on that key. What's the key driver of value at the moment? And probably it's being able to say you take Bitcoin at checkout. So that was the bit that I would focus on. And the key there is actually the challenge that you'll often have is that the stakeholder who's been charged with bring Bitcoin to the business wants to do it all. Well, we can't do that unless we actually show them on the product detail page what it's going to be worth in Bitcoin. They're obviously necessary requirements. And the trick there is probably to try and establish both a time cost and a physical effort cost on doing those two things separately. So actually being able to say, well, we can do checkout, we can focus on that, but actually if you want to do if you want to do like having it on the product detail page, it's going to be a separate system integration. You're going to have to spend an extra 3 to 4 months. You've got a lot of project risk. It could cost this much extra, and almost being deliberately pessimistic about that additional cost. Normally, what it does is it escalates it above a product owner stakeholder level, at which point it goes to somebody who actually has, has to put their money in their hands in their pocket, and at that point they'll go, actually, do we need to do all the 6 different things? Well, actually, we just want it at checkout at the moment because we want to be able to say to the public, we take Bitcoin. And that's the bit that you end up then focusing on. So that's the key, is to not get lost at the sort of project management stage of, actually, it needs to have all these features. It needs to talk to all these different systems and actually go, no, what we need to do is one implementation of it as short as possible and that hits only maybe one system. Yeah, and then it might be a custom piece of work, or it might be a vendor that you talk to, but you've got a very deliberately well-defined piece of work you're doing.
Rebecca, I know you won't be transacting in Bitcoin anytime soon on the BBC, but I'm sure you've had some, a left field kind of change that's...
Well, even if it's not left field, which I would definitely be taking a pessimistic view, I think, on left field trends. Something new that's coming in that could potentially touch every part of your infrastructure, for instance, voice. So the BBC's got very established, that's another word for legacy, established publishing systems. And so when we start thinking about how will voice be another channel for us, we're not going to go and start ripping open everything and running a voice channel through every single one of our systems. We need to learn more about how our customers are going to want to interact with content, how content makers are going to create content, and how that whole production journey is going to evolve over time. So we want to experiment, and we're going to run a parallel stack as high up as we can to manage publication and interaction through voice. So our core content platform will remain the same, but we'll create some experimental publishing segments, if you like, on top of that, in order to learn and get experience and then make decisions about where we invest through the rest of the
Will that be a limited beta access, those kind of tactics?
Well, it might be limited in that we'll pilot in certain content brands or certain channels or certain content types or production teams or something like that. So we won't roll it out to our entire journalism fleet, for instance. But we would still offer it as a product available to the public. But we just know that there isn't going to be huge demand for that initially. So let's learn as much as we can, as quickly as we can, before we start, as Dan says, a huge transformation project that has way too many dependencies and complexity and risk.
A lot of that is about establishing that what is valuable, because you don't necessarily know which bits of the ideas or the emerging technologies are going to be valuable to you as a business. So, like, trying those sorts of things out means you can find out what's valuable, and you don't have to do all this big integration to the legacy system of work.
Have you been approached to just do voice? You just make it all work on an Alexa?
Not so far, no. But I mean, we have, just going back to the question about sort of payment methods. I mean, we have recently done some, not Bitcoin, but we've adopted some sort of buy now, pay later methods like the Klarna's and odds, and seen some positive impacts on sales and stuff. So I think if you're looking at that sort of payment gateway as a service type approach, then really you should be able to implement any type of payments, be it traditional ones like cards, or the more sort of Bitcoin, or the sort of non-traditional ones as well.
Okay, Hannah, have we got the questions? I don't know where Hannah is, so we got a roving mic.
There we are. The questions
here
are
we go.
now on the screen behind
And
you.
you can see them as well. Well, let's go for the first one. It's got, on the right-hand side, there are votes. So this is from Mr. Tomlinson. What place does microservices play in protecting against legacy issues in the future? Well, you rubbished microservices at one point, so got
Yeah,
used to
Dan.
that.
Rubbish is probably not the right word, but yeah, I do think the word especially is overused, and since the introduction of
Excuse me, what does microservices mean?
Um, so microservices are effectively, rather than having one big platform that has all of your code in one place that does everything that you want it to do, or maybe a few,
Yep.
you basically break everything down into tiny code bases that just do one thing.
And can you give me an example of one of those?
It might be payment calculations, or
Right.
it might be holding and storing basket information if
Right.
you're doing e-commerce, for example. And generally, those can be, they're small enough that they can be managed. Multiple of them can be managed by one individual team, sometimes even one developer. And so you can, and again, they're very small, so they're easy to change. They're sort of slightly interconnected. They definitely serve a purpose. My view on them is that often it's underestimated the amount of support and maintenance infrastructure and effort that they require to maintain. So they're extremely useful if you've got large, like highly scalable systems. I imagine the BBC probably are big fans of microservices. But when you have systems that need to cope with very high load, you're changing in peak demand, and possibly even as well geographically split development teams, it helps you separate all those things together. But each of them has their own infrastructure costs. Each of them has their own maintenance and support costs. So there's good things and bad things about them.
Okay, Rebecca, your pros and cons of
Yeah,
microservices.
well, it can go really badly too far in the microservice direction as well. We one of our big media platforms that we did a massive rebuild on a few years ago now has like hundreds and hundreds of microservices, more than there are people in the team, obviously. And so it adds a maintenance headache in a different direction, because suddenly you're going, which of these are in use? And is that one actually doing what it's meant to be doing anymore? So it's getting the balance, I think, in introducing those where the pain points are, not just going, right, let's re-architect this whole thing as hundreds of microservices, and then it'll be all brilliant.
Thank you. Steve, have you got any microservices? Or
We've got
big-
quite a few. I think they play an important part in that, breaking up big into little. But I guess to sort of highlight the point, I think when you end up with like 20,000 of them, then that has its own cost and its own own right around looking after them, making sure they're monitored, scalable, all the rest of it. So I think it's about getting that balance right of having just enough chopping up to kind of make it manageable.
Thank you, Mr. Tomlinson. So the next one is, on Rebecca's point, if the people who didn't build the original system aren't there, how do we have the knowledge on the architecture to break it up?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's where we get dragged into edge cases, that people just start coming out going, oh, I think it does this, I think it does that. We write a lot of test-first software, and so unpicking what a legacy system does, we might start by writing tests around the interfaces, what data is coming in, what's going out, and that helps guard against things that you don't know about. You're continuing to learn about it through its behavior as you change it, which is sweaty palm situation, but that's one of the tactics that
Certainly
we
my
use.
experience, I went into a major book retailer, asked to take over their entire e-com operation, and there were some very strange, weird rules in there that, certain merchandising rules, no testing, no documentation.
Yeah.
No one even remembers what they're for.
No,
Yeah.
and so
Exactly.
everyone was terrified of touching it, and that's when you get into the, just press the nuclear button and have a new thing.
I'm just going to say that. Unplug it and you'll find out quickly what's of value and what
Yeah.
isn't.
I think to try and make sure that as part of your process, you make sure you've got documentation and testing as much as possible, because everyone's got business that one guy knows everything, and when he leaves, the whole
Yeah.
thing stops. So I think you just got to be rigorous in your approach and make sure that anything that you develop or bring in house, it's got as much behind the scenes documentation on it as possible.
I'll be controversial about that, and I'll even say I don't even think documentation cuts it. I try to document my stuff, but it goes out of date. Unit testing is the one thing that, for developers, is a really good thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you can actually look at the unit test and you can understand what the original code was doing. That's the great thing. Dan?
Yeah, I'd love unit testing to be the be-all and end-all. I think, we do a lot of unit testing within our company. The problem is, in order to get a high enough level of coverage to be really useful for a lot of those things, you have to be really draconian in making sure that tests must pass, all of that sort of stuff, and that's quite difficult, especially, it can often be a bit of a barrier to innovation as well. I think in terms of how you break up a legacy system, the main thing that I think I would say I've learned when dealing with that sort of element is don't just trust hand-me-down knowledge. You often get a lot of, we can't touch that system because otherwise X, Y, Z would break and the whole universe would fall apart. And if you sort of sit people down in a room and say, okay, we have to get this done some way, how can we do this? How can we think differently about this problem to get this solved? You'll often find there is ways, and there is ways of doing it. And most of the time, businesses have been going for years going, we can't do anything to the system because everything would fall apart. And actually, it's just because that might have happened 5 or 6 years ago with the technology that was about then. But technology moves on so quickly, and there are so many solutions around for dealing with legacy systems, for replacing legacy systems safely, that actually, with some of the new tech, you can often overcome those barriers.
Okay, and next question is from Elliot, who asks, how do you unify the teams in an organization to accomplish these goals? Typically e-commerce or IT are separate. Do you have separate teams, Rebecca, who do
we got
different aspects of this?
dozens and dozens. We've got editorial teams, we've got marketing teams, we've got tech teams. They're all in different reporting lines. But it is about having those common goals and keeping that simple and being really clear about it, and just being ruthless, I think, about edge cases and but and wouldn't it be better if, and that kind of thing. It kind of doesn't matter whether they're all in the same division or organizational unit or not. The complexity is still there because they're people. Transformation is as much a people challenge as it is a technology one.
Okay, and what about in Boohoo, because your title is IT operations, are you out the back in the cupboard doing IT and there's the commerce or other retailers in another room?
Yeah, but it's quite a big cupboard though, in fairness. We are split in terms of, I think we've tried to, traditionally the website was an IT thing.
Yeah.
And I think we've tried to push it back into the world of e-commerce because it's their platform. Like, it's not my platform, but we just run the back office stuff and kind of run it. So I think we've tried to give ownership of the systems outside of IT because e-commerce is a website, marketing on the CRM system. So I think we've tried to deliberately empower those teams to sort of be in charge of their own.
And are you using agile practices with business owners coming in and being part of those teams?
Yeah, it's quite an agile business. We don't use waterfall, so it's a trading business. So there's not really much sort of.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for.